Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's great to be here with all of you. I really appreciate your commitment to this Sangha and to showing up in this way to support each other. Well, not surprising to those of you who practice for a while, I thought that today I would talk about suffering because Buddhism is really good with this theme, suffering, and there seems to be an awful lot of it going on. So I thought I would just really focus on suffering, which I think is actually one of the things that the practice does that is so supportive, is actually, rather than trying to avoid suffering, to really actually look at it and begin to practice with it so that we can really understand how it impacts us in our lives. So really this way that we can begin in our practice to fully focus on how is it that we orient ourselves? What do we use? What markers? How do we orient ourselves to our lives, to the world? How do we navigate this relationship between the internal and the external? And most of the time, in really understandably, we orient towards that which will make us feel secure, that which will give us ease, that will give us comfort, and we prop ourselves up in some ways, in these ways that we think will just, this is what will take care of it. So I wanted to start off with this beautiful poem by one of my favorite poets, Joy Harjo, who's a member of the Muskogee Nation and also was the poet laureate of the United States for quite some time, a while back. And so I'm going to read some of it. It's kind of long, so I'll just read a few sections of it and then read some more of it later. The name of this particular poem is called "For Calling the Spirit Back from Wandering the Earth in Its Human Feet." For calling the spirit back from wandering the earth in its human feet. So I think of us all as sort of these wanderers in this search of how do we orient ourselves in our lives. And so this is how it starts off. Put down that bag of potato chips, that white bread, that bottle of pop. Put down that bag of potato chips, that white bread, that bottle of pop. You can see where this is going, huh? Turn off that cell phone, computer, and remote control. Open the door, then close it behind you. Take a breath offered by friendly winds. They travel the earth, gathering the essences of the plants. Give it back with gratitude. If you sing, it will give your spirit lift to fly to the stars, ears, and back. Acknowledge this earth who has cared for you since you were a dream. Let the earth stabilize your post-colonial insecure jitters. That's such a good line. Let the earth stabilize your post-colonial insecure jitters. So there's more to it, and I'm just going to pause at that point with it. But I just really love this invitation to, put down all of these trappings that we have that we think are going to provide us comfort. Maybe yours isn't about the bag of potato chips, but certainly at times it is mine. And, the computer and all of these things that we can use to support ourselves, and close the door, just really allow ourselves to rest on this earth and let the earth stabilize us. Really connecting ourselves to that which is right here and that which is greater, looking out at the stars, and taking this moment to know what is the path that we're on, and where is it headed in the choices that we are taking. So we are impacted by the world. We are not impervious. Sometimes we think that, we can just armor ourselves or take ourselves away, but we're impacted by the world and what has come before us and what is happening now. And it makes sense that we are concerned about security, our own security, that of our loved ones, those we care for. There's so much impact that's happening in so many communities right now that our heart can feel very stretched, very tender. It can be hard to know how to respond. And so sometimes we can feel like we're just sort of wandering and bumbling around in this reactive mind. And the Buddha has spoken to this. The Buddha calls this reactive mind, this way that we can just sort of bumble around, wandering on, samsara, Samsara in the Pali. And it actually means this wandering on. And Thanissaro Bhikkhu says that in this quote that I really appreciate, samsara literally means wandering on, quote unquote, in the early Buddhist text. It's the answer to the question, what are we doing? And instead of being a place, it's a process. It's the tendency to keep creating worlds and then moving into them. As one world falls apart, you create another one and go there. At the same time, you bump into other people who are creating their own worlds too. So when I think of this term samsara, the image that comes to my mind is when you go to the amusement park and you get in those bumper cars, and we ride the bumper cars and there we're, creating this thing and we're impetus and we bump into somebody else and they bump into us and then we go back and we're ricocheting off each other, this reactive way that somebody's actions create an reactivity and then someone else's reactions create an activity. And the interesting thing is that when I was young, I used to love the bumper cars. It was so much fun, like boom, and now my body, like, it's just like, ouch, why do I want to do that? Why do I want to keep reacting and bumping? And it's just not that much, all of that drama, if you will, it's just not that much fun anymore. And so, at some point there is this question, you're like, what is going on? Where am I heading? Why do I just keep doing this over and over again? And so this, I think, is a very healthy question. Where is this behavior leading? Where is this reactive mind going? And how can I engage? And so I really appreciate that Buddha also had this question. And what is it that motivates us on this journey? What is this search? What is it that we're looking for? We engage in this place where there's just so much suffering, and we only have to take a moment to even just kind of just rattle off without even thinking, whether it's the suffering of climate change, the suffering of the economic system, the suffering of the federal policies that are just being strewn out of control, the suffering of our own bodies, the suffering of our families, on and on and on. And so the Buddha asks us about this suffering. In the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha says, what is the ripening of suffering? There's always this translations and ways that can kind of help us begin to think. I'm sure this is some sort of Victorian English translation, but what is the ripening? What is the fruit of suffering? Where does it go? Where does it lead? And the Buddha says, what is the ripening of suffering? When someone is overcome and the mind is obsessed by suffering, they sorrow, grieve, and lament and beat their breast, weep, and become distraught. So oftentimes suffering and we just become frantic, we pull our hair out, or else they undertake a search. Buddha says, I say that suffering either ripens as confusion or ripens as search. And I love this because it kind of brings us to this place that suffering is essential on the path. It is this place of suffering that leads us to this question of like, how do I orient? how do I engage in the world? That the suffering in and of itself is essential for this questioning of like, what is freedom? So the Buddha says suffering ripens as confusion, or just like, oh, I don't really know what the heck is going on, or like, I need to figure this out. And so, what do we need more of? What do we need less of? So how can we engage in the world so that we can get allow ourselves to be more free? What do we yearn for? What do we try to avoid? And the Buddha on the night of the awakening, the Buddha says, might there be another way? Might there be another way? So this is that search. What is that? What might there be? How do we engage? And so it is this first stance, if you will, and some of us might understand this as the first ennobling truth, but really knowing that there is suffering, that this is suffering. And in Buddhism, unlike the religion that I grew up in, where it was like, not only am I suffering, but it's like I am to blame for my suffering. I'm born as someone who suffers. Like, but in Buddhism, we just say this is suffering. This is suffering. What if I'm experiencing right now is suffering? But just to kind of pause for a moment and to really understand that this term suffering is actually sort of a conglomerate of looking at something that is a little more nuanced. So, for example, oftentimes dukkha, D-U-K-K-H-A, which is the word in the Pali, is translated as suffering. We just kind of use it as a catch-all term, but it really could be just this sort of sense of frustration or a little bit of unsatisfactoriness or unpleasantness or really onto anguish and despair. And so this pain that the world, that when we are born, just by the virtue of being born into the world, suffering ensues. And in the Pali, the language of the Buddha, the word dukkha actually refers to the axle, the hole of the wheel. So when you had the cart and the axle going through the hole, the wheel. And so when the axle was balanced and riding well, there was not dukkha. So when there was a smooth ride, dukkha doesn't ensue. But we all know that the wheel, sometimes like if you go to the bicycle shop and you just see the wheel just spinning up in the air, and there it spins so nicely, or even like, the car is up on the chassis and the car and they're fixing it and they're aligning the car and it's all fine. But then you put the car or the bicycle on the ground and all of a sudden it's not so smooth anymore. There's potholes, there's, you know, you try your best and then something happens and the bottle, like my friend was just saying, he was trying to ride his bike and all of a sudden his water bottle cage like fell off and then he was downtown Oakland and couldn't turn his wheel, we just things happen, the bicycle, you're in the shop and everything looks perfect and then you engage with the world. And so we have this idea that this smooth ride, and then we meet the world. And this is just sort of the, analogy for our practice is that internally we're preparing, we're doing all these things, and then we meet the world. We meet all the bumps of the world. So in Buddhism, we understand that we will meet bumps. We will wobble. There will be friction. And so then how do we practice? How do we engage with this dukkha, this suffering? And so I just wanted to say a little bit more about this term and how some of the ways that in Buddhism we look at it. And please know I'm not discrediting or disallowing the intensity of suffering and that it varies from life to life and that the causes and conditions of each of our lives are different. But just if we look through this lens of Buddhism can sometimes help us in orienting towards the stress of our lives. So the three types of dukkha that the Buddha expounds upon, the first one is dukkha-dukkha. And to me, this can make actually dukkha be a little more fun. If you're like something's happening and you know, hammering in something and you hit your thumb, you're just like dukkha dukkha, you might use other words, but that's basically what's happening. You're like dukkha dukkha, something hurts. Dang, it's my body, it's my thoughts, it's just mental, emotional pain that happened from our lives, like dukkha dukkha. It really is all of this stuff that happens, the broken bones, the headaches, the nausea, the stomach ache, all of the things that happen just by aging, the mind not working right, and also the mental things of just like how we feel. We feel lonely, we feel anxious, we feel disappointed, isolated, all of the things that ensue, wanting what we have, no, wanting what we don't have, not wanting what we have, all of these things, this unsatisfactoriness. And to me, this understanding, we see dukkha, 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 and then we investigate it, we turn towards it so that it can be understood. And this is such an important place of just turning towards it instead of blaming or shaming or kind of beating our breasts, as the Buddha would say, laments and beats their breast to confuse, like, why? Why? If we're like, oh, this is happening. What is going on? Can I investigate it? I turn towards it. Can I understand it? And I do think this is the place where also our practice is not only just mindfulness, but we have these heart practices of compassion so deeply embedded in our turning towards this. And there's a kind of a different way of looking at things where we don't get just sort of wrapped in the stories around it, but engage in what would be called more this wise reflection, so that we can see that there are causes and conditions that have led to this. And this wise reflection can actually lead us to sometimes seeing the second part kind of dukkha, which is the dukkha of impermanence. And so sometimes one of the things that happens with dukkha is that we get caught in it. We think it's always going to be this way. It's always going to be this way. That, something happens and I'm feeling sad and lonely and depressed or whatever the mind state is. And then the next thing is that I will never find that person. I will never get, whatever. It becomes even bigger, concretized in that story of this is how it will always be. And so sometimes, this idea of the dukkha of impermanence, that change can actually be useful. That change, when change allows, like the change for the better. Like we always, we don't mind change if it's like getting better. Like if I'm, getting a better job, I'm getting more money, I'm getting, like change is not the problem when it's working in our favor. And oftentimes we think, like I should always be changing, but I should only be changing for the better. I should be, improving all the time. That, I am like this betterment project. Let me just like keep fine tuning and get the best form of this one here. But we know that change is unpredictable, and that because of change, that this sense of like wanting our happiness to lay in those places of the body, heart, mind, our own or another, is not reliable, um, unpredictable. Everything changes. Our bodies, our minds, our relationships, even if we're with the same person, our relationship changes because their body, hearts, and minds are changing. Our partners, our children, we can't make our partners or our children stay the same way. Finally, they get it right. Finally, they figure out their life. And then what happens? Things change. Our finances, the environment, all of these things that we rest our happiness in will change. And so this is the truth of dukkha. This is where suffering is part of our world. It doesn't mean we just can't throw up our hands and say, oh, okay, it's all suffering. This is the impetus for the search. This is the search. We're either in confusion or we're in search. So how do we orient ourselves? Because there is some level of security and some level of wanting things to be a certain way, and that we do want to be in relationship with people, and we do know there's happiness in there. So, how do we engage knowing that everything changes? And so, this is where we turn our mind to the changing circumstances of our lives in this way, like knowing that our loved ones will change. Can we still love? Knowing that this body, heart, mind will change. Can I be mindful and offer compassion? So we practice with this truth of suffering, practicing with how to be with as much kindness as possible, as much compassion as we can bring to each situation, whether it's internally in ourselves or externally with those in our communities. And it's pretty amazing because, when something drastic happens, like a hurricane or an earthquake, it's pretty amazing how a community can come together. Everybody can all of a sudden, lose their sense of this is mine and this is how I am, and reach out to each other. A few years ago, I had this experience where I was flying back from Boston, where I have family members, so I go there quite frequently, and flying into San Francisco. And maybe you all remember, it's probably about 3 years ago, there was like those bomb cyclones that were happening in January. And we're flying into San Francisco airport, and we're flying down, and all of a sudden the plane like went up like a rocket. We just like the dip of the plane went up, and the pilot came on, and the pilot said, and I've never had this happen before, the pilot said, we just got too close to another plane. We needed to like get out of there. We are now going to Sacramento. And so the pilot, we had been circling for a while. The weather was really bad, and the pilot just took the plane and got us out of that situation. And I thought, wow, for the pilot to come on and tell us we were in really dire straits, we must have really been in dire straits. We were too close to that other plane. And the funny thing is that everybody in the plane started talking to their seatmates. We had all been, kind of engaged, ready to go down, go land and doing whatever it was we're doing, kind of trying to ignore the person next to you as best as you can, even though the flight's 6 hours long. And then, I find out that the person next to me is this young person who's part of an orchestra, and their cello is beneath in the hold. And then the other person, I found out about this other person who lives in San Francisco, is a gay man, and we just end up having these similarities, and we have this conversation, and we have all of a sudden we're a community. We're a community, and we're in this situation together. And it was so fascinating because, we had been in the same situation together, but we were just not community. We were not engaging with each other. And all of a sudden, when this intensity happens to all of us, we cross among our differences and then meet each other. And so this really this sense of like almost being hit by our own impermanence of like, wow, that was a close call. That was a close call. And I don't know if any of you were here when the earthquake was happening in San Francisco Bay Area. It was similar. Like all of a sudden, everybody in the Bay had been through that big one, that earthquake, and you could talk to anyone about it. And they knew, and they were feeling that insecurity of change, that all of this trappings of the world that we were holding on to, we had kind of let go, knowing that in the end, it doesn't matter if you have a big house or a small house when your house falls over. And even those of us, like my community members I know who are unhoused, who come by and we have conversations and tea at times, sometimes I think they are more prepared to deal with the world as it unfolds than I. The third type of dukkha that the Buddha talks to us about is sankhara dukkha. And I bring in this term sankhara, Sankhara, dukkha, because I think helps us understand, because oftentimes we don't use this term of the conditions of our lives. So samkara is translated as volitional formations, habit formations, this karmic formations, constructions. And so it's this idea that based on past experiences, whether in this life or in Buddhism, it could actually be past lives, there are things that will unfold. So the image that I find very useful for this is the image of like a record player, where then the record, where you put the record on the record player and it plays the music because of the grooves in the record. And so in our lives, we have very familiar grooves that this is just sort of what we've gotten become accustomed to how things go. And it plays music, sometimes discordant music, sometimes beautiful music, but these are the grooves of sort of the habit formations that propel us forward. And so this is the way that our conditions can engage us with the world. And it's interesting to think about the way the world is right now, and particularly, I'm just going to call it a mess in our country. Those of us, I don't know if any of you are in Canada. I'm sorry if you for the United States, if you are in Canada joining us, or if you're in another country, but we have kind of a mess here in the United States right now. And this idea of conditions being leading us into suffering really helps us understand this, because so many, it kind of can help us look at some of these terms that we can know scientifically as like epigenetics, how the suffering of our ancestors then transfers to now. And so some of the structures and systems that were in place in our society lead us to the suffering of today. And I'm not a sociologist or a scientist in that way, so I can't tell you particularly. Was reading a little bit about history today, and some of the ways the economic systems has now currently arisen, given rise to this one and this theory of this particular um, economist and historian. And it is interesting to hear these theories and to know that there are causes and conditions that have given rise to the current situation. And so it's really helpful for each of us when we're thinking about the suffering that arises in our lives and where we get attached and where we want something, to really take a reflection into how we are propelled forward based on the habits of our families, based on the habits of society and schools and the culture. And currently, I didn't grow up with as a digital native, but the social media is propelling us forward. And even now with this confusion around, what can we know as truth? Where do we go to align ourselves? And so this is the conditions. These are all of the conditions that lead to suffering. So this is the third type of suffering, to really look at these karmic formations, the things that have led us to make our choices. Like sometimes we think, oh, I'm a very objective, I'm making this choice objectively, but it may be based on the teachings that we have learned that we're making those choices. And so all of these ways of dukkha are to be investigated, to use this capacity of wise reflection. Zenju Earthland Manuel, who many of you may know, was a Zen teacher who used to teach in San Francisco Bay Area, now in Santa Fe, says about this dukkha in her book, The Way of Tenderness. She says, "How could a path to spiritual awakening possibly unfold if we turn away from the realities that particular embodiments bring?" So we need to include all of who we are, all of this that as we encounter in the world. She says, to confront hatred with spirituality is to confront the way we view race, sexuality, gender, or whatever form of embodiment we are as living beings. To provide a meaningful path to spiritual liberation, spirituality must acknowledge the body and the denigration of certain types of bodies in this world. And so, this spiritual path of liberation, this search, includes the body. We are our bodies, the bodies as they break down, the colors of our bodies, the shape of our bodies, the capacities of our bodies, and the heart and the mind. So spirituality acknowledges the bodies and the bodies in relationship with other bodies. And so we turn towards dukkha in this path. We turn towards it to practice, to investigate, what is the truth of what it means to be human? What is the truth to mean to seek this freedom, to seek this liberation, so that we can unhook and unbind ourselves from this place of reactivity, of samsara, of wanting, non-reactivity. And I think, what I have found that it takes a lot of heart. It really takes a lot of heart. It takes a lot of tenderness. And the training that I had was more the sense of steeling myself against the world, walling myself from things, this real protective shield. And I do think at times, it's very wise to be like, okay, like the Buddha would be like, stop. But there's a different permeability of staying present and being here for ourselves than just shutting down all the time. And it takes, I think, a lot of courage. I think it takes a lot of courage. It takes courage for us to show up as queers right now when we are being vilified again and again. It takes courage to include the trans community that is just becoming the bone or the focal point for so much of the attacks. And how do we show up for ourselves and each other? And I really think that's where the heart practice. If we're always turning away, then when something hard happens, the heart needs to have that practice, the muscle of the heart. And so when we think of the word courage, courage actually comes from the word for heart, the French word, "courage," which means heart. And the courage is really this place of this perseverance in the face of change, in the face of impermanence, in the face of all this conditions. And so as we engage in this search, this longing to be free from suffering, to turn towards it with this heart, not to avoid, but to understand that this world will entail suffering. So how can we know it? How do we lead not into confusion, but lead to freedom? Thich Nhat Hanh says, we should not be afraid of suffering. We should be afraid of only one thing, is that is not knowing how to deal with our suffering. So this is different. So then when suffering occurs, not like, oh, this shouldn't be happening to me, but like, how do I deal with this? How do I meet this moment? And I think when we think about our world not being as a linear, always getting better, always improving, but more like the cycles of the earth, that we can then allow ourselves to be in that moment. So we think sometimes the image of like, I know we still maybe even have some of these, but I've tried to get rid of them all in my house. But the pots that have the Teflon and, and nothing sticks to them. And you're like, oh, these are so easy to clean. And we think, oh, wonderful. And then we get the information that like, oh, Teflon actually includes all of these forever chemicals that now are in your bodies. And you thought it was the best thing ever, but now we know it's not. And so we too have begun to train ourselves to not to just be like, oh, I want this to be gone as quickly as possible, but to be with, to allow our hearts and our mindfulness to practice to be with this suffering so that we don't lead into confusion or pushing it away, but we lead to freedom. And Joy Harjo says, acknowledging the earth who has cared for you since the beginning, connecting to the earth, to this earth that's not linear, this earth that is now. And in that poem that I was reading at the beginning, she says further on the poem, she says, watch your mind. Watch your mind. You know, this is how we practice. Watch your mind. She says, the journey might take you a few hours a day, a year, a few years, 100, 1,000, or even more. Watch your mind. Without training, it might run away and leave your heart for the immense human feast set by the thieves of time. Without training, it might run away and leave your heart for the immense human feast set by the thieves of time. This is another way of saying what the Buddha says, that we just want things and we run to these immense feasts to avoid that which is here. And then at the end of the poem, she says, let go of the pain of your ancestors to make way for those who are heading in our direction. So we hold on and we think it's going to be this way. She says, let go of the pain of your ancestors to make way for those who are heading in our direction. And then the last line, she says, then you must do this. Help the next person find their way through the dark. So this relational field where we help each other, we reach out in our sangha and our communities, we're generous. We know that our hearts will be touched and that at times we'll be able to offer support and that at times we'll be receiving. Reaching out for those who come after us. Just ending with the Buddha's language on this, where the Buddha says, go forth for the good of the many, for the happiness of the many, out of compassion for the world, for the benefit, for the good, for the happiness of all. Practice the Dhamma that is beautiful in its beginning, beautiful in its middle, and beautiful in its ending. We sometimes have to teach ourselves to see this beautifulness because we've not known that suffering might actually, right in it, have that beauty. Unbeknownst to us, our hearts are training to hold all of this. That we too can meet this. We can meet this moment with courage and wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you, JD.
Thank you.
Do we have announcements?
Did you, I don't know, George, if we have enough time for questions or are we moving
We have
into
enough time. It's 11:45.
Okay, great.
Anybody have questions?
Or comments.
Oh, okay. Hi, JD. It's Matthew. Uh, uh, Something that I found really helpful to navigate through these times have been, I picked up a copy of When Things Fall Apart by Pema Chodron. And can you hear me? Yeah. And then also No Mud, No Lotus by Thich Nhat Hanh. And but particularly what's been helping me is her other book, Pema Chodron's other book, The Places That Scare You. And I think a few weeks back I even mentioned during the Sangha meeting about how the election had just this feeling of having a rug pulled out from underneath me and suddenly thrown into uncertainty. And then even as I said it, I thought, oh, well, what else isn't uncertain? And in the next weeks, I invited myself to explore those stories that I've told myself that give me a sense of security. And Pema Chodron talks about the special place of groundlessness and even hopelessness in one's life. And I really have been kind of invited that into my life the past few weeks. And it's probably one of the most powerful practices I've ever come up with for myself. I felt like in free fall. And just, just remembering to keep breathing and keeping my heart open. But anyway, it's been very valuable. So I kind of have the past election to thank for, finally making me look at stuff that was there all along.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for bringing in that. And Pema Chodron's book, Comfortable with Uncertainty, the title itself is very valuable, and the practice even more so. And just that way of beginning to realize the external, and I'm just going to use this word intentionally, the trappings of our lives that are, like, don't get me wrong, I love waking up in the morning and having a cup of coffee, and I know that it's not ultimate freedom, but there is that beauty in that ritual in my life. And so to be able to have that balance between, the things that provide us solace and then also what actually is going to bring us liberation. So knowing that these impingements and as you say, like the impact of the elections on the disruption of what we think of as this is the way things are, can they actually bring us into a place of awakening rather than to a place of just like, avoidance or running away. So thank you.
Hi, Katie. Yeah. And I absolutely loved your talk and how you broke down suffering and the issues of it and the three qualities or parts of it. And it, when I was younger and I wanted to find some peace of mind, I looked at Buddhism, but the first noble truth, to be born is to suffer, turned me off. They didn't say it's not all suffering, or you will experience suffering and other things. But it really is enlivening to acknowledge the amount of suffering we have. This, and that there are tools to reduce it. And
Yeah.
the ripening of suffering, as you taught it, is such a beautiful way of, such a beautiful question. Where is this going? And it does go one of those two forks, right? Going within, or just, living the dream, wandering more. And in India, on the Ganges River near Varanasi, the oldest and most sacred Hindu city on the planet, there's a temple downriver where the land juts out like just a point, and then it comes back. So the river goes around it, but they built a temple at that point where it juts out to honor the place where the moment in which we ask that question, what is this for? There has to be more. There must be more. The search began. So the turning around is,
Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing that. A beautiful image. Appreciate that.
Anyone else?
Anybody online? Oh,
Thank you for the share, JD. That was really powerful. And it gets me thinking, because I've been avoiding social media lately, and I looked at something today with all of what happened yesterday, all over California, all over the globe, but really obviously in the States, and so much vitriol in our community and rage. And I thought, how is it, this isn't constructive. Like, can we transform, what can we do with this? Because it's just all reactivity right now versus, and I'm thinking about, like, is it attachment that's leading us into this place of wanting things to be a certain way rather than just meeting it and saying, here we are, and this, we've been here before, and we keep doing it over and over again. Somehow stepping up and fighting, right? But fighting the rage. There was so much violence in the posts I was seeing, and I was like, this is self-hatred or something. It just seemed like it was just the mirrors. So I don't know, I'm just curious if there was, the Buddha had a view on that, or if you have a perspective on how to, like, it is so heated right now.
You know, I will tell you one of the things that the Buddha, in the teachings of the Buddha, but that I'm not actually always have the capacity to do. But there is a really profound teaching where the Buddha, there's an encounter of the Buddha where somebody is trying to dump all this rage onto the Buddha, all of this hatred. And the teaching in the Buddha is the Buddha is unruffled. And this is where I'm not always able to practice in this way. And then the person gets even more upset and was like, I'm throwing all this stuff on you. Why are you unruffled? And the Buddha is like, you are offering me something that I am refusing to take. I'm refusing to take that. I know this not to be true. It's not landing. There's no place to land. And so it's as if you were giving somebody a gift and they're not receiving the gift. And I say that because I realize that, when I'm tired, when I'm angry, all those things, like somebody will say something about trans folks and boom, I'm like off in a moment. Somebody will say something about, somebody like being deported and I'm just like, I can't hold it together. I'm so angry. And not that the anger is negative, but that the reactivity is taking a toll on my body, heart, and mind. And so I think that there is that capacity to transmute and to allow allow all of this to be a catalyst for this search and how do we live our lives towards freedom, and knowing that it will take a toll. So I do think the wisdom of sort of the titration with the media and with these stories and things is very helpful, but not the complete hiding ourselves from it, because we want to be able to engage from these places of skillfulness. And so I aspire to this place of allowing myself to meet all of it with kindness, with wisdom, and know that in the real world that sometimes I don't sleep at night, I wake up in the morning, I'm just a disaster, those kind of things. And so there's the real place of, and that's where I think, our Sangha and our relational field with our communities is very helpful, because sometimes we're offering, and sometimes we're receiving. So sometimes we're the one who's generous, and sometimes we're the one who's being supportive. So thank you for that.
David?
Judy, thank you for your talk. What really resonates for me is when you said, open the door and close the door type of thing. So for me, just investigating, staying with what's going on as much as I can, shut the door, maybe get that cup of coffee, that solace that you talked about. But what's really hitting my mind is when you're on that plane and it goes shooting up, and then the way people come together, I think we're at that moment. And I just thank you for your talk. It's getting me to a point where I do want to investigate these sorts of feelings that I push away. And we've got to get to where that we're rocketing up and connecting and creating community. That's what I take away from your talk. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.